So it's Gascoigne with a great run here. Is Paul Gascoigne, can he finish it off? Oh yes he can!
There are footballers who dazzle. There are those who inspire. And then there was Paul Gascoigne. In the summer of 1990, under the floodlights of Italy, a stocky Englishman with mischievous eyes and dancing feet ignited something more than just a game. He made a nation believe. He turned fear into flair. Every time he touched the ball, England didn't just watch, they held their breath. And when he cried, knees bent, head lowered, eyes full, the whole country wept with him. It was supposed to be the beginning. It felt like prophecy. But behind the brilliance was a man already crumbling. Not even 30, and the cracks were there. Rage he couldn't explain, voices he couldn't silence, addictions he couldn't resist. The same feet that danced past defenders began to stumble into darkness. Pubs, police stations, clinics. Gascoigne wasn't just losing games, he was losing battles no one else could see. Once hailed as the greatest English talent since George Best, Gazza didn't fade away quietly. He spiraled. Publicly, violently, tragically. But what happened between the tears in Turin and the tremors of a ruined genius? Why did a man with the world at his feet, playing like a god, descend into addiction, isolation, and almost oblivion? What broke Paul Gascoigne? And was it just the drink, or something far darker that no one dared name? This is not a story about goals, it's about ghosts. And this is Paul Gascoigne. Paul John Gascoigne was born on May 27, 1967 in Gateshead, a gray industrial town just south of Newcastle. He didn't grow up kicking balls in perfectly trimmed suburban parks. His pitch was the street. His crowd, the neighbors who peered out of windows. His applause came not from stadiums, but from the sound of mates laughing when he nutmegged them on concrete. His father was a hod carrier. His mother worked in a factory. Money was tight, and Gascoigne would later recall moments of childhood filled with terror, not from schoolyard fights, but from the fear that gripped him as he watched his younger brother nearly die from epilepsy. These early traumas left scars that would never fully heal. As a child, he would panic over imagined deaths in the family. He obsessively read obituaries. His nervous tics and restless mind were dismissed as quirks, but they were warnings. And yet, when he played football, all that faded. On the pitch, the chaos stilled. Everything made sense. By the time he was scouted by Newcastle United's youth team, there was no denying his genius. Stocky but quick, clumsy-looking yet silky in motion, Gascoigne could do things with a ball that defied logic. His touch was velvet. His vision was clairvoyant. His style was scruffy elegance, a blend of street football instinct and rare imagination. The 1980s English football scene was tough and uncompromising. It was an era of bruisers, of long balls, of muddy pitches. But Gascoigne arrived with something else, artistry. He didn't just play football, he performed it. In a time when English players were defined by grit, he brought grace. At Newcastle, his flamboyance was impossible to ignore. But with talent came temptation. He began drinking early, part of the culture, they said. Pints after training. Nights that blurred into mornings. Teammates laughed it off. Just Gazza being Gazza. But it wasn't just alcohol. It was adrenaline. It was escape. His transfer to Tottenham Hotspur in 1988 for a then-record British fee was a declaration. This boy from the north was now the future of English football. At Spurs under Terry Venables, he flourished. The FA Cup run in 1991 was vintage Gazza. In the semi-final against Arsenal, he scored one of the most thunderous free kicks in the history of the competition. A 30-yard rocket that silenced the Gunners and sent Tottenham to Wembley. But that final would also be his undoing. Just minutes into the match, a reckless challenge from Gascoigne tore the ligaments in his knee. He was stretchered off in agony. A moment of madness, in a game meant to crown him, ended his season and began a long, painful spiral. But back then, the narrative was still hope. After all, he was just 24. He had time. He had clubs lining up. And in 1992, he made the bold move to Lazio in Italy, following the steps of other foreign stars who had gone to conquer Serie A. But the pressure was different now. Italian football was tactical, suffocating, and media-obsessed. Gascoigne's injuries hadn't fully healed. His mental health, never truly stable, began to fray under the microscope. And his vices followed him. The Italian press adored him at first, but when the magic waned, they turned. Yet none of this was obvious in 1990, the peak. That summer, England went to the World Cup in Italy with modest hopes, but Gazza lit the tournament on fire. His dribbles, his smile, his raw emotion, he became the face of the team, and then the face of the nation. It was in the semi-final against West Germany that the myth was born. One reckless challenge, one yellow card. It meant he'd miss the final if England won. He didn't sob, not loudly, but the camera caught it. The tears swelling in his eyes, the tremble of his lip, the sorrow of a boy realizing his dream might die before it lived. It was a rare moment in English football, a flash of vulnerability in a warrior's world. Overnight, Gazza became more than a player. He became a symbol of passion, of heartbreak, of unfiltered humanity. They called him the people's player. But few asked what price he paid to carry that love. The signs were already there. He couldn't sleep. He drank more. He joked too much, partied too hard, clung to laughter like a shield. Behind the charm was a growing void, one that fame, money, and applause could never fill. What England saw was magic. What they missed was the man unraveling behind the magician. By the early 90s, Paul Gascoigne was a household name, not just in Britain, but across the footballing world. He had become an icon, a player whose sheer unpredictability made every game electric. But as quickly as he ascended, the fall began. Not with a scandal, not with a disgrace, but with a snap. The sound of ligaments tearing in his right knee during the 1991 FA Cup final. That one moment was more than an injury. It was a fracture in time, the tipping point between promise and unraveling. The injury kept him out for over a year, delaying his transfer to Lazio. By the time he finally arrived in Rome, the magic had started to flicker. Serie A was a fortress of tactics and discipline. Gazza was anything but disciplined. He was late to training. He clashed with teammates. He drank, often. In a notorious incident, he burped loudly during a press conference, live on Italian TV. What the English press once laughed off as classic Gazza, the Italians found childish, even offensive. His performances were erratic. At times, he dazzled. At others, he disappeared. Injuries kept haunting him, but it was more than physical. Lazio's manager, Dino Zoff, once remarked, "Gascoigne plays with his heart, but his heart is tired." Off the pitch, things worsened. His relationship with his fiancée, Cheryl Fales, became a violent tragedy. Police reports, hospital visits, allegations of physical abuse. The tabloids lapped it up. Gascoigne denied, then apologized, then denied again. The public watched, horrified, but somehow still sympathetic. He was falling apart, but he was still our Gazza. After 3 years in Italy, marred by controversy and injury, he returned to the UK with Rangers in 1995. Scotland embraced him. The Glaswegian fans adored his chaotic energy. On the field, he revived glimpses of the old magic. A stunning hat trick against Aberdeen, a cheeky goal celebration mocking Celtic, a title-winning season. For a while, it felt like he was back, but the darkness never left. Behind the scenes, his drinking escalated. He would vanish for days. Rangers staff reportedly had to lock minibars in his hotel rooms. He was found wandering the streets, drunk, more than once. In one chilling episode, he walked into a bar alone, ordered a drink, then turned to the TV showing his highlights and muttered, "He used to be good, that lad." The national team still called on him. Terry Venables, who had long acted like a father figure, brought him back for Euro 1996. And for a moment, England believed again. That tournament became his last true swan song, especially the wonder goal against Scotland, that chip over the defender, the volley, and the infamous dentist chair celebration. It was vintage Gazza. Brilliance wrapped in madness. But just weeks later, the spiral resumed. Rejected by Glenn Hoddle for the 1998 World Cup squad, Gascoigne allegedly smashed up the manager's office. He begged, cried, and pleaded, but was left behind. That snub broke him in a way no tackle ever had. He later admitted he never mentally recovered from it. The moves that followed read like a man on the run from himself. Middlesbrough, Everton, Burnley, Boston United. Even a bizarre, short-lived spell in China. Each move was supposed to be a fresh start. Each one ended in disaster. Off the pitch, his behavior became more erratic. He would disappear, appear on TV interviews slurring. He admitted himself to rehab multiple times. He was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, OCD, and alcoholism. He was sectioned under the Mental Health Act more than once. And yet, the cameras kept following him, even when they should have turned away. The media called it a slow-motion car crash. But it wasn't slow for Gascoigne. It was spiraling, spinning, a descent with no brakes. He attempted comebacks. He offered himself to clubs as a coach, even as a player. No one wanted him. Even the PFA, his own union, seemed to distance themselves. At one point, he tried managing a non-league club, Kettering Town. He lasted 39 days. In public, he was still met with cheers. Fans shouted his name, bought him drinks, took selfies. But no one could stop him. Not his friends, not his family, not even himself. Once, when asked if he was okay, he replied, "I used to be Gazza. Now I don't know who I am." By the 2000s, he was more likely to appear in headlines for being arrested or hospitalized than anything football-related. His face was swollen, his speech slurred, but his name still rang with affection. For many, he was the last truly emotional player, the last to cry without shame, to play with reckless joy. But now, joy had abandoned him, and all that remained was a man trapped between past glory and present agony. By the mid-2000s, Paul Gascoigne no longer resembled the man who had lit up Italy in 1990. His body had changed, bloated, unsteady. But it was his eyes that told the real story. The sparkle was gone, replaced by a haunting vacancy. His laughter still came, loud and exaggerated, but it no longer reached his eyes. The truth was, Gazza was not just battling alcoholism. He was fighting a war inside his own mind. Long after his last professional match, he began to disappear from football and resurface in darker corners of the public eye. There were mugshots, hospital gowns, cuffed hands, disoriented interviews where he mumbled about being poisoned, followed, or talked to by the voices in the mirror. For years, many believed Gazza was just a drunk, a washed-up genius turned pub clown. But behind the headlines was a far more tragic reality. Gascoigne was suffering from a combination of bipolar disorder, obsessive-compulsive disorder, and post-traumatic stress, a diagnosis that came only after years of denial, abuse, and mismanagement. His addiction wasn't just about the bottle. It was about self-medication, about silence, about numbing a storm that had started brewing in childhood. He admitted in a rare, lucid interview, "It's not the drink I'm addicted to, it's the escape. When I drink, the voices go quiet. I stop thinking. For a while, I just feel safe." He once described sitting alone in a hotel room with 14 bottles of wine, not out of celebration, but out of fear that if he didn't drink, his hands would shake so violently he'd hurt himself. He talked about hearing voices, one cruel, one kind, and flipping a coin to decide which one to obey. The Gascoigne the world adored was not an act, but it was a fragment. The public saw the boyish charm, the prankster, the clown who played the flute with his nose on live TV or showed up at Raoul Moat's armed standoff with a fishing rod and chicken, believing he could calm a killer with a joke. But these weren't just eccentricities. They were cries for help, dressed in chaos. He spoke of suicide, casually, hauntingly. Once, after downing dozens of Valium pills and whiskey, he woke up in a hospital bed. When asked what he remembered, he simply said, "I didn't want to wake up." There were rehab stints, too many to count. Some funded by the PFA, some by celebrity friends, some by strangers. In 2010, fellow former footballer Chris Evans launched a public appeal to raise funds for Gazza's treatment. Fans from around the world donated. It wasn't just sympathy, it was guilt. A collective guilt for having consumed his genius and ignored his unraveling. In between the collapses, he tried to speak about mental health, addiction, childhood trauma. But each time he emerged, he seemed weaker, more fragile, as if every attempt to recover cost him a piece of himself he couldn't afford to lose. And yet, people still cheered, still called him legend, still posted his goals, his tears, his smile, disconnected from the man crying in a rehab bed, alone and shaking. Perhaps the darkest truth of all is this: Paul Gascoigne wasn't destroyed by fame, or drink, or even his own mind. He was destroyed by a culture that celebrated vulnerability on the pitch, but punished it off it. He was never taught how to cope with pain. He was only taught how to play through it. He was never protected, only exploited. A story often whispered among his inner circle tells of the night after the 1990 semifinal loss. Alone in his hotel room, still in kit, he stared at the ceiling and asked no one in particular, "Will they still love me now I've lost?" It was never about football. It never really was. It's easy to talk about Paul Gascoigne in the past tense. Easy to remember the flicks, the tears, the goals, the laughter. easy to call him a wasted talent, to shake our heads and say, if only he had stayed sober. But to do so would be dishonest, because Paul Gascoigne wasn't just a footballer who lost his way. He was a mirror, reflecting everything football culture refuses to confront: mental health, addiction, emotional vulnerability, and the unbearable weight of public expectation. Yes, he made mistakes. Yes, he hurt people. But those truths exist alongside the others: that he brought joy, that he made the game beautiful, that he gave parts of himself no one else dared share. He wasn't just crazy, he was sick. And the system, clubs, federations, media, fans, didn't know what to do with someone who didn't fit the mold. We loved Gazza when he cried for a yellow card, but we laughed when he cried in real life. We cheered when he clowned, but looked away when he collapsed. So who failed Paul Gascoigne? Did he destroy himself, or did football, and all of us watching, let him fall? Could it have been different if someone, somewhere, had said, he doesn't need another drink, he needs help? If clubs had treated the mind as seriously as the hamstring? If the media had drawn the line between character and caricature? Or did we, in our hunger for heroes who hurt, quietly demand the crash just to feel something ourselves? This channel does not romanticize tragedy, but we believe in truth. And the truth is, Paul Gascoigne was never just a footballer. He was the embodiment of a generation's contradictions. A genius shackled by trauma, a clown hiding depression, a warrior with no armor. He was never built to survive the machine. He wasn't polished. He wasn't scripted. He was human. And that, in the end, might have been his greatest flaw and his greatest gift. So we ask you, was Gazza a wasted genius or the inevitable casualty of a brutal system? Did we lose him too soon, or did he lose himself long before we ever saw him? There are no simple answers, but there is responsibility, shared across the decades, across the headlines, across every cheer that turned into silence, and maybe now at last we begin to reckon with it. Today, when you say his name, there's a pause, a breath, a flicker of memory, not just of the goal against Scotland, or the tears in Turin, or the thunderbolt against Arsenal, but of who he was when he smiled, the way he played, reckless and raw, as if each match were his last, as if the world outside didn't exist, just ball, boots, and beauty. And maybe that's why we still talk about it. Because in a sport now obsessed with systems and stats, with press-trained players and image-managed careers, Paul Gascoigne remains untamed. He played with a heart too open, with emotions too real. He cried without shame. He celebrated without calculation. He didn't just love football, he needed it. And we, in turn, needed someone like him. He has no Champions League, no Ballon d'Or, but his legacy isn't measured in silverware. It's in the way fans still sing his name in pubs across England. It's in the countless kids who copied his flicks in the schoolyard. It's in the tenderness we reserve only for the ones who showed us their soul. And even in his darkest moments, he never stopped trying to return. Not just to the pitch, but to himself. There's a certain ache when watching those old clips now. The sparkle in his eyes, the laugh, the reckless run down the wing. And you realize he wasn't just playing football. He was fighting with it for a sense of joy, for a place to belong, for a moment where the noise stopped and everything, for once, made sense. Paul Gascoigne may be gone from the field, but he will never be gone from memory. Some legends are crowned, others are mourned. Gazza is both. Some stories were never meant to be told, but now, you know.